Ulysses Grant died on July 23rd, 1885, just 1 week after he had finished his memoirs. In Clermont County, Hugh Nichols, who became the first Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, was a teenager at the time, and he wrote a very expansive series of articles for the Cincinnati Enquirer about Grant from a local perspective. And he had a number of stories that he added in there I thought was pretty interesting, especially for a teenager writing. I mentioned earlier General Henry Corbin, who was intimately connected almost through birth with Grant through the years. Grant had, at that ceremony where the house, where the cannon blew up and nicked him in the neck, Grant had officially offered Henry Corbin a commission in the regular army, telling him that he shouldn't study law because there's so many lawyers as it is, that the army would be a good fit for someone of his character. And I could just imagine in my mind seeing Corbin, who was 6'4", standing next to Grant, who was 5'8". And the story was Grant yelled at him across the room and says, "Corbin, come here. Why is it it's disturbing to me that you didn't receive or make an offer, respond to my offer about getting a commission." And he said, "Oh, I didn't receive it." He says, "Well, I'm giving it to you now." So Corbin decided to take the offer. He stayed in the military the rest of his life, working life. And in 1885, he led the military, was organizing the military parade for General Grant. So it was an interesting connection over all those years. In 1922, actually April the 27th, 1922, was the centennial of Grant's birth. And they decided to have a big celebration at Point Pleasant. And the guest of honor was President Warren Harding. They estimated that as many as 80,000 people attended in Little Point Pleasant. There's a photograph from the riverside looking over the bank. It was just absolutely crowded with people. And one of the modern wonders that they talked about was the sound speaker system that they put in by Cincinnati Bell. And you can see it in the photograph rising above everywhere so that all the people in this whole area, this 80,000 people, could hear what the President Harding had to say. Before he got there, there was a 7-boat caravan. One of the boats was the Island Queen, which carried over capacity of 2,500 people on it. As it went by New Richmond, before it got to Point Pleasant, there was a loud crack that was heard, and the top deck crashed down on top of the second deck and the first deck. There were over 24 people there that were injured. One was killed. Sometime just before they left, they put President Harding on a different boat. He was supposed to be on the Island Queen. The police inspector who looked at the boat afterwards determined that it had been tampered with. I don't know what the exact results of that study was, but that was a suspicion that had been tampered with, and the question is, was this an attempted assassination of the president because he was supposed to be on the boat? Don't know. It's just interesting speculation. The president's speech, one of the things that he commented on, you have to remember this was just 4 years after World War I, and that was still in the minds of people, and the death and the destruction that occurred as a result of World War I. And what the major portion of his speech dealt with Grant's magnanimity, and again referring back to how he treated the defeated Confederates with respect and desire to reunite. And the president compared World War I to a civil war between the members of the Western civilization, and that they could have used a Grant to try to bind the wounds that was caused as a result of World War I. And of course, history has shown that World War II came about 20 years afterwards, and many historians consider that to be just an armistice period at the same war. So that was what he was saying. And then they later concluded by saying that there was 37 years since Grant had laid down his pen, meaning after he had finished his memoirs, and made his one and only surrender, which was to death. Those are the comments that the president made. On the same time, the same day, the Grant statue in Washington, D.C. was dedicated. We hear a lot about statues today and what people are doing to respect them. I hope that most people understand that Grant was a friend of the African Americans, friend of the American Indians, and he certainly was not a part of the Southern aristocracy that attempted to reestablish slavery in the South. And I hope we consider those before some people decide to deface his statue. Grant's reputation has risen and fallen and risen again throughout the years. A lot of it was related to the Lost Cause. The Lost Cause was the title of a book printed in 1868 by a gentleman by the name of Edward Pollard. It was an attempt to reframe the Civil War as a noble cause, that it was about states' rights rather than slavery. It was a little hard for the author to contradict what happened with each one of the 11 seceding Confederate states. Each in their statement clearly stated that the reason for the war was slavery. It wasn't states' rights, it was slavery, pure and simple. So this was, again, an attempt to reframe it. And one of the ways that they attempted to reframe it was to denigrate Grant. Since Grant was the hero, considered to be the great general, at this time he was still pretty popular in the South. But this is what Pollard compared Grant to. He said he was a drunkard. Yes, drank. I think it shows Grant had drank over time and also during the war, but there was no evidence that he ever drank during the battle or before the battle. He was always sober. He was always on his game, unlike several other generals that were actually found to be drunk during the war, during the battle time. He also said that he won as a result of luck, that it wasn't his skill as a commanding officer, but it was just lucky in that he won because the North had more supplies and more men. And the third thing he said was he compared him to Moloch. Moloch was known as Baal in the Bible. It was a Canaanite god that at times required child sacrifice. And during the ritual of child sacrifice, they heated this metal statue. The statue had a huge mouth, and the statue would glow red when it got hot. And then they would take a live baby and throw it through the mouth of the god and consume in fire. And this is what he was saying about Grant, that Grant was such a butcher and he caused the deaths. But again, modern historians have disputed that, and that he was actually very careful with his men and knew about his casualties. So I think that probably helped to cast the considerations of Grant as a general. Very interesting is that over time, and very quickly after 1868, Pollard started backing off of these conclusions about him. But members of the Southern, particularly in the 1890s, Southerners began to accept this as a gospel, and the United Daughters of the Confederacy were starting to establish putting in programs and books about the Lost Cause as a way of changing the theory around. And that was during this period between the 1890s and 1940 was when most of the statues were put up in the South to the Southern generals and politicians during that period of time. So this theory of Grant as a drunk, Grant as a butcher, as a lucky general, held sway for a long period of time. And my first encounter with Grant, I recall when I was in 5th grade American history. And we were supposed to write a short paper about somebody involved in the Civil War. Nobody wanted to choose Grant. They all thought that it should have been Lee, should have been the Southern soldier or somebody, because Grant wasn't held in high esteem. I got Grant. I was the last one on the line, and I was mad because I didn't want to do Grant because I didn't think much of him. Obviously, that's changed over the years as I looked into Grant, researched him, read about him. And I think he deserves a reevaluation, both as a general and as a president. And yes, he had the scandals during the presidency, but he accomplished a lot, and he set the stage for the expansion of the economy, set the stage for new protocols in foreign affairs, and he was the civil rights president. And I think Grant's approval rating is starting to go up again. One of the things that was introduced in the 1960s by William Manchester, who was the author kind of the court historian of the Kennedy administration, was rating presidents great, near great, average, and duds. And that was the Grant was always down near the bottom with James Buchanan, Warren G. Harding, and that was rated by both the historians and the average individuals, because the average individuals were asked to contribute part of the poll. But in the last few years when this has happened, Grant he's bowed up to average now, which was quite a leap over those years, and I think it's warranted that he's looked at and evaluated in new light of what he's accomplished.